Because my main character Andre isn't very sympathetic, I have to do some research to figure out how to make an unlikable person, an unlikable character, more sympathetic to the reader. I need to learn how to make a good first impression. I'm also going to need to look at my manuscript as a whole and see where maybe I'm making some mistakes, and hopefully I can unlock some expert mode writing techniques. The first thing I've been researching is how to make your character sympathetic out of the gate. I want people to keep reading, and it doesn't make sense, it doesn't work to make Andre sympathetic later in the story. He needs to be sympathetic on page 1. I started my research with the Blade itself. The first Law trilogy is notorious for how unlikable its characters are. I mostly just was in awe at how just horrible these characters are and how much I love them. Unfortunately, I struggled to really figure out what Joe Abercrombie was doing. The one thing that really stood out to me was Glokta's introduction. In our introduction to Glokta, we get this really human moment with him with his relationship with Stairs. And we don't know really anything else about him, but that one connection with Stairs helps us get inside his skin. And so when he starts torturing people, a scene later, we've already made a connection. And as the story goes on, Glokta keeps referring back to that thing that we humanized with, that we connected with. I think another thing that helped was his sarcastic tone is kind of endearing. Mostly. I mean, that's the thing, is that Glokta's horrible. I want to reread The Blade itself to see if I can get some more information out of it, because I'm sitting here still flabbergasted as I make this video. So the next thing I'm going to research is Westworld and hopefully get a little bit more out of it. I will check in with you guys soon. So I got pretty hooked on Westworld. I was originally going to come in and talk about what they did for character first impressions after the first episode, but it was so good I didn't stop watching to come make a video. The biggest thing I've learned from this show is that first impressions make a big difference. The reader's first impression of a character sticks. It forms a core to then build around. So no matter how horrible this person is, if you want them to be sympathetic from the beginning, highlight their best quality. Even if in the next scene they're doing something horrible, we're going to latch onto that good quality, especially if it's repeated throughout the story. The second thing I noticed was that conflict forces me to choose sides. And then when I side with a character, I now sympathize with them. All this research got me thinking about the Dresden Files. I didn't really like Dresden all that much when I first started reading, and it made me wonder, why did I continue reading? I think the big thing for me was, even though I didn't like a lot of his inner dialogue, I could kind of see past the facade that he was putting on. Though harder to pull off, this obviously is an approach that you can take as long as it's done fast. If I hadn't been able to see through this facade right away, I probably wouldn't have made it through the first chapter of Dresden Files. I'm hoping that I can apply some of this research to the fourth wall, but as of right now, I don't really know how. My next step is going to be looking beyond first impressions and looking at a story as a whole, and especially looking at my story as a whole and seeing where maybe I've made some mistakes. As I've been putting my thoughts together about how to keep your characters sympathetic throughout the story, I've realized the fourth wall has some major problems. First off, the characters in my main plot are not very well fleshed out. I am sympathetic to the horrible characters in Westworld because I understand why they behave the way they do. And not only that, I have multiple reasons to be sympathetic to them. But so many of the characters in my A plot are just paper dolls. Flat. Second, my plot is missing some key elements. You would think that a lacking plot wouldn't have anything to do with a sympathetic character, but for example, take Peeta and Haymitch away from Katniss, and I don't think she would be very sympathetic anymore. Especially if you take Prim from her, she's gone. Problem 3, Andre needs better and more opposition. His problem gets solved a little too easy, but if he had to work harder for his goals, I think that the reader would feel for him more. Problem 4, world building follow through. While the majority of my characters feel colorful because of the world building that I've put into them, I haven't had that same kind of world building follow through with my main character, Andre. Leveling up his world building will hopefully make him more interesting and less vanilla. Right now, I'm not making any changes. I'm still researching and gathering ideas. I want to look at a few more examples before I dive in. I've been reading The Pariah by Anthony Ryan, and I think I've unlocked expert mode. I've noticed in this story that often a different character will feel like the protagonist in any given scene instead of the main POV character feeling like the main character. And instead, that POV character kind of takes on like a different role in the story. As I thought about it, I realized that's how dynamic stories work. That's how characters feel dynamic in the first place. In real life, we move around through each other's stories, and if my main character isn't doing that, it feels disingenuous and it feels self-centered and unsympathetic. I could do all this work to tweak my manuscript and my main character, but if the rest of my characters don't have their own story to tell, their own lives to live, their own things that they want to achieve, Andre can't really interact with them in meaningful ways, and he can't influence them and possibly even change their story, and he won't feel real or sympathetic. I'm hoping that if I can give my other characters wants and motivations, that Andre can weave his way through their stories and feel real and more sympathetic. I think out of everything I've learned in this process, I think this last idea to give other characters more motivation and more of a story will do the most work in making Andre sympathetic. And in turn, it will do the most work in leveling up my manuscript. I'm going to continue my research, but at a much slower pace as I move my focus into implementing these things I've learned into my manuscript. I've got big plans thanks to all this research that I've done, and I'm super excited to jump right in. I'll check back in as things progress, but in the meantime, check out another video.